All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dives. Sure, we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be finishing the monk subclasses in Star Wars 5th edition by looking at the Nightsister order. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this stuff, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important for not only to let me know that you enjoy this, but also for other people to see it. Also, share this video around a little bit, because I always forget to say that, and that is also a really important way to get other people to see that. You know, tweet about it on Twitter. I don't know. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Trader Jody. Tag me in it. It'll make me feel special. So, the Nightsister order. Anyone that is familiar with, I guess, Star Wars Expanded Universe stuff, because the Nightsisters themselves really haven't shown up in the core Star Wars movies. But they show up a fair amount in the video games. They showed up in the Legends Expanded Universe books on a fairly regular basis. And they are Darksider users. Traditionally in the Legends universe, the Legends continuity, they were, I believe, exclusively female. Like, there were no male Nightsisters or Night Brothers, as we'll talk about here in a second. It was effectively a Sith cult that was exclusive to females, but it wasn't like a race or anything like that. Like, they could... It wasn't like, you know, they were bringing men in for breeding or anything like that. It was a cult that only really allowed women to join. And they were, to be blunt, they were super creepy. And depending on which book you were reading, were either really dangerous and gave the heroes a lot of trouble, or they were just super creepy, like hyper planner style characters, kind of like the Emperor, where his real power was not really that he was that dangerous a Force user. He was very powerful, but his real power was his ability to plan and manipulate, rather than his just pure mastery over the Force or anything like that. Like, he couldn't have taken over the galaxy just by, you know, shooting Force lightning at everything. No, he was a master planner, and that is the thing that eventually killed him, was that he started to believe in his own ability to plan for anything, and didn't plan for the one thing that ended up killing him, which was his most trusted lieutenant betraying him. So, yeah, there's tons and tons of lore. Excuse me. There's tons and tons of lore about them, but let's see how they translate to Star Wars 5e. Quick reminder on 5th edition class design. Every class is designed to play very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, every class has these things called defining features. The defining features are either something that is unique to the class, or maybe it's not unique, but they get it earlier, or they can use it in a different way than any other class. And in order for something to be a defining feature, it needs to show up within the first 2 levels. Star Wars 5th edition is a conversion of 5th edition. It is not an expansion, so it does change everything. It is not compatible with regular 5th edition, though there are a few things that can kind of be used interchangeably. A lot of monster stat blocks are similar enough that the challenge ratings might be off, but challenge ratings are off anyways. So, but the actual classes themselves are different. Star Wars 5e classes are a little bit more powerful. They do a little bit more damage. They have a little bit more that they can do. They've been buffed up a little bit. So the exact same class in Star Wars 5th edition is going to feel a little bit more powerful than the exact same class in D&D 5th edition. That being said, refresher on the defining features, because I don't think we've talked about them. They're martial arts, which basically means monks get to their damage die for unarmed strikes and monk weapons gets bigger as they become more powerful. There's a lot of kind of confusing things about martial arts, but in Star Wars 5th edition, it's a little bit more complex than D&D 5th edition. But the basics are monk weapons, punching. You can make an additional unarmed strike as a bonus action if you make an unarmed strike or a attack with a monk weapon for as part of your attack action. And then you can use dash or disengage as a bonus action. So that's one defining feature. Unarmored defense is the next one. They have a different way to calculate their AC. It's either Dex plus Wisdom or Dex plus Charisma. Focus is the same as Ki. That is their limited resource. It lets them do some cool stuff. Flurry of Blows just lets you make extra attacks. At 11th level, you can make up to... you can make up to 3 attacks as a bonus action. Patient Defense. You can dodge as when you disengage. You can also dodge as a bonus action. And at 11th level, you can burn 2 focus points to get an additional reaction. And then Step of the Wind, you can fly. Which is nice. It also doubles your movement speed, but at 11th level, you burn 2 focus points and you can fly, which is awesome. So yeah, those are the defining features of the monk. The reason I bring this up is because the way that subclasses are designed for 5th edition in general, the subclasses need to somehow interact with the defining features of the class, or in general, they're just not going to be very useful. So something in here has to somehow interact with the defining feature, or you're going to be fighting against your subclass and your class are going to be fighting against each other for what gets your limited number of actions per round. So that being said, what does the Nightsister Order do? Let's dive into it. First things first, I have been hypercritical of the descriptions because I'm a huge believer in the idea that lore should dictate mechanics. I think the best mechanics are inspired by lore. You know, the idea of the why is more important than the what. Strong believer in that. And thus far, the descriptions for all of these have been really, really bland and really haven't told you what the subclass is meant to do. It's not true about the Nightsister Order. Monks of the Nightsister Order utilize an innate force sensitivity to commune with death. They learn to channel this power to drain the life of their foes to prolong their own existence. Males who join this order are called Night Brothers. So again, that's a slight change from my understanding of the lore. There are no Night Brothers in Legends canon. It was an exclusively female sect. But I have no problem rewriting the lore for this. I'm not a huge fan of like gender-locked classes or subclasses, things like that. I think it's kind of dumb. Especially in RPGs, or tabletop RPGs. Like video games, it's dumb enough, but I can kind of see some of the justifications for it from a mechanical standpoint, as in like how to build a video game. I can understand that. For a tabletop RPG, I just don't. I'm not a huge fan of gender lock classes. I'm actually not a huge fan of race lock classes either. I have no problem with saying, you know, traditionally this, you know, particular class or subclass or something is, you know, is designed by elves, like for blade singing. But limiting it to, oh, you can only be an elf and only elves would ever be able to do this. Never in the history of man has anyone ever been able to create anything and have been able to keep exclusive control over it. There are always going to be knockoffs. There are always going to be people that figure out what you did, and 9 times out of 10 there's going to be people that figure out how you did what you did and learn how to do it better. So anyway, so this actually has more lore than any of the rest of the subclasses that we've seen, and arguably almost as much lore as the monk class itself, which again I'm a big fan of. As we go into the abilities, I don't think the lore matches up with the abilities, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Overall, very, very happy. If I go, I want to be a Nightsister or a Night Brother. Sorry, I have the worst cotton mouth right now. If I decide, hey, I want to be a Nightsister or a Night Brother, this description tells me exactly what I should be expecting. These are effectively necromantic monks, and I'm totally good for that. I think it's a really, really cool thing, the idea of a group of people really kind of studying the ideas of life and death, especially when there's magic around that can affect that, or in this case, the Force. I think that's a cool thing. So, moving on, let's go to the actual abilities. At 3rd level, you get Ichor Lightning. This is the Sun Soul Monk, Radiant Sunbolt. It's almost identical to the Sun Soul Monk Radiance as a Sunbolt. I did do a deep dive of the Radiant Sun, or the Sun Soul Monk, but it was combined with a bunch of other. It was one of the first videos that I did, and it was combined with a bunch of other monks all in one. One of these days, I may go back to those early videos and break them down more like the ones I do now, where it's just a class or just a subclass. But for the most part, Way of the Sun Soul is one of the coolest sounding monk classes and the most disappointed when you find out what it actually does. Way of the Sun Soul was kind of an attempt to make a ranged monk, and it didn't work super well. Because their 3rd level ability, their kind of big defining aspect of the subclass, was Radiant Sunbolt, and Radiant Sunbolt was technically supposed to replace your unarmed attacks, so you could basically do them from range by shooting, but it was significantly worse than that because you couldn't use your bonus action to get a free attack, so you generally still, to get all the attacks you were meant to get, you had to be up close, or you had to burn a key point, because you could still burn a key point to make 2 additional ranged attacks, but you couldn't make the regular 1 ranged attack. Ichor Lightning changes things up. They mess with the wording a little bit of it. First of all, damage for the attacks are necrotic instead of radiant, which is what the Sunbolts were. So that's the first thing that they changed. And they specifically mentioned when you make an unarmed strike as part of your martial arts bonus action attack or your flurry of blows, you can place the attack with this one. And they specifically say it counts as an unarmed, the basic attack, it counts as an unarmed strike for the sake of your martial arts feature, and you use your martial arts die for its damage die. So effectively, this is a fixed version of Radiant Sunbolt, because now you can do the same amount of damage, but you can now, and the same amount of attacks, and because it counts as an unarmed strike, things like Stunning Strike won't work, actually, because that's a melee weapon attack. Urgh, fancy, fancy, fancy. Never mind. Ignore that. But anything else that would proc off of a unarmed strike will proc off of Ichor Lightning. So that is cool. I like that. It kind of fixes a huge problem I had with Radiant Sunbolt, was it just wasn't anywhere near as useful enough. With this and the limitation of, well, it's not going to work with Stunning Strikes, so one of the big kind of quote-unquote broken things, it's not broken. One of the broken things about the monk, you can't now stun from range, which would create some pretty big problems, to be blunt. I like this. I think it's really, really cool. The problem with this is a 3rd level ability that's kind of cool and gets more powerful as it levels up because it's based on a defining feature. It's based on the martial arts ability that gets more powerful as you get higher. So that's nice, but when we look at the rest of the subclass, this doesn't work with the rest of the subclass because the rest of the subclass is taken from another subclass. This is two subclasses combined together, and it's done a little bit poorly. And to be perfectly honest, neither of the subclasses are amazing subclasses, but the one they copy from more is a slightly more balanced subclass. So, yeah. Moving on. So much better. All right. Moving on. Your 6th level ability is called Dark Magic. You can use your action to force each creature within 30 feet of you that can see you to make a wisdom saving throw against your focus save DC, or be charmed or frightened, your choice, of you until the end of your next turn. So, if this sounds familiar, that's because it is a modified version of the 6th level ability from Way of Long Death. It is almost identical, the big difference being you can use Charmed or Frightened, while the Hour of Reaping, which is the Way of Long Death monk. By the way, the rest of this class is Way of Long Death. Like, this class is literally the Way of Long Death monk with the Sun Soul 3rd level ability. Everything else is from the Way of Long Death. Which is one of the reasons why I don't think it works super well. So I mentioned in my very like 3-year-old video where I talk about Long Death. This can be a really effective ability that you can use from an action economy controlling standpoint. Mostly from the Frightened condition. To be blunt, the Charm condition is really not that useful in combat. Charm condition makes the target think of you as a friend, and that's it. There are a lot of reasons why I might hit a friend. There are a lot of reasons why I might completely ignore what a friend is telling me. There's a lot of reasons why I might beat the snot out of a friend. Having them consider you a friend in the middle of combat really isn't that useful. The Frightened condition, significantly more useful. Frightened, anytime they're within light of sight of you, they have disadvantage on all attack rolls. They cannot move closer to you. So those two things are massive action economy controllers, which is what the monk does best. So by positioning your monk in a certain place, you can ensure that the enemies that need to be in certain places won't be able to get there. You specifically maneuver yourself in ways so that, like, if the big ogre thing wants to try and kill off your cleric who's keeping everyone alive, him running up to get to your cleric is going to be difficult when he can't get closer to you, and he's only able to kind of skirt around. Makes him waste his action, makes him waste his movement. Like, it's a really useful thing. The charm thing really is pointless in combat, and because it only lasts until the end of your next turn, the charm condition is basically useless. The Frightened condition is somewhat useful, but again, it only lasts for a round. And when you start looking at opportunity cost, for anyone that doesn't know, because I talk about this every so often, opportunity cost is an economic idea that is basically most people do not think in terms of dollar value. Just in general, like, people, as much as we can put dollar values on a lot of different things, we can price how much gas it takes to go from, your home to your place of business. We can, talk about, this product costs you $10, this one costs you 20, things like that. What most people think of is in the idea of opportunity cost. If I do this, then I can't do this. The way it's explained in economics is opportunity cost is if you have a Mexican restaurant, to use the example that I think I remember, and you have, or no, it's a pizza place. That's what it was. It was a pizza place. And your pizza place can serve salads and pizzas. And you have one employee. In the time that it takes them to make one pizza, they can make 2 salads. So the opportunity cost of making one pizza is 2 salads because they can't make them both at the same time. That's how opportunity cost works. In D&D, you have a limited number, or in this case in Star Wars 5e, you have a limited number of actions. And again, in 5th edition stuff based on the 5th edition SRD, action economy is the most important thing in balancing combat. Whichever side has more actions or can do more with those actions always has an advantage. So when we look at something like dark magic and we think about opportunity cost, you have to use your action to use dark magic. The basic opportunity cost equation you look at that point is, okay, I can either make 2 unarmed attacks or I can do 1 dark magic attack. But that's not everything, because using your attack action to make unarmed attacks also allows you to make a bonus action attack for free. Or you can burn a key point to make 2 attacks at 6th level. So it's not so much 1 dark magic action is not worth 2 unarmed strikes. It's actually worth a minimum of 3 or 4 if you have focus points, or in this one it's focus points, if you have focus points to use. So when you start looking at that and the fact that it only lasts for a single turn, dark magic becomes significantly less useful. The other thing that's not great about this, it's a 30-foot radius circle that you affect with this, with you in the center. That's a 60-foot in diameter. That is effectively the entire battlefield. And this is each creature within 30 feet of you that can see you. So this affects your allies as well. And because it is such a large area, the ability to not get your allies affected by this is significantly more difficult. Now, all of this changes, and I don't know if they have this in Star Wars 5th edition, because I haven't looked at the equivalent of the Paladin in this, which I believe is the Guardian. I believe the Guardian is effectively the Star Wars Paladin. But if you had a Paladin in 5th edition, if you had a Paladin that was a high enough level, he could effectively make your party immune to fear. Because he had an aura that would make people immune to fear, and it eventually gets really, really big. So in that case, that becomes a significantly more useful ability. Without something preventing your team from becoming feared, this ability becomes super, super circumstantial, and the only kind of saving grace of it is it only lasts until the end of your next turn. So they only have to deal with it for a single round, unless you're doing this every round. To try and prevent something like a large ogre from getting there. And basically, again, every time you use it, there are other things. So how it's written, and again, this is taken directly from the Way of Long Death, how it's written in both ways, it's a really kind of very limited use ability. It would probably be more useful if the range was small. As weird as it sounds, it would be more useful if the range was smaller, because then you would actually have the ability, especially with how hypermobile a monk is, you would actually have the ability to get to a place where you could affect the enemy and not affect your allies. So that's the biggest issue. The other way they could play with this, which I don't think would break it either, simply because the way it's written right now, it's almost useless, is to just say, to force each creature within 30 feet of you that can see you Instead of just saying to force each creature, it's force each creature you choose within 30 feet of you that can see you. That would allow you to basically not let your allies get with it. And then it turns into a somewhat useful ability. Without either of those, it's just really... There are certain situations where it will be absolutely, definitely useful. But the fact that it can get your allies just as easily as it can get your enemies means that this has so many situations where it's just not going to be useful unless you're fighting on very, very large battlefields. Most battlefields are only going to be about 60 feet in diameter in general. Like, that's a pretty big... I mean, 60 feet is 100... No. It's not 120. 60 feet is... what, 12 squares wide, if I'm doing that right? Yeah. So it's a 12 by 12 square if you're using a grid, which is a decent sized room in general. So yeah, a lot of times you're generally not going to have a battlefield much larger than 60 foot in diameter. So yeah. And again, this taken directly from the Way Along Death, so... Moving on. At 11th level, you get Mastery of Death. Again, this one is 100% taken directly from Way of Long Death. When you reduce to 0 hit points, you can expend 1 focus point, no action required, to have 1 hit point instead. This, when I talked about the Way of Long Death, this justifies the entire class. Because you effectively become unkillable. As long as you have focus points, you cannot die. And there are a lot of situations where not being able to get to 0 hit points changes things dramatically. There's quite a few abilities where if it drops you to 0 hit points, you insta-die. Things like the Disintegrate ability, insta-death. There are certain monster attacks where it specifically says if this reduces you to 0 hit points, you die. Or I think there's one, I think the Intellect Devourer, if it can reduce you to 0 hit points while it's on you, it sucks your brain out and you're dead instantly. So Mastery of Death effectively means that as long as you have focus points, you are immune to any condition that would kind of insta-kill you. Because anytime you would go to 0 hit points, you burn a focus point and you have 1 hit point instead. You don't go to 0 hit points and jump up to 1 hit point. You never hit 0 hit points. The way I described it in my other video is, imagine wandering into the middle of a bunch of really, really bad guys. And they just unload on you. You just come in there and go, ha ha ha, fuck you all. And they just unload on you. And Star Wars is going to be even cooler. You know, they're shooting rockets at you and filling you full of blaster bolts. Maybe there's a Jedi in there who's just cutting you into tiny little pieces. The smoke settles. And you're sitting there and you are bloodied and covered in just, you know, all the stuff that has just hit you. But you're still standing there going, you know, you got? Bring it on. From an action economy standpoint, this is a brilliant way to waste the enemy's actions. Because it literally doesn't matter how much damage they do. They could do the most damaging ability. They could do 400 damage to you in a single attack and it wouldn't matter. Because as soon as you hit 0 hit points, you are instantly at 1 hit point instead. There's no remaining damage. You don't take damage on a sliding scale. You know, damage isn't like in Earthbound where it's a little dial that rolls and rolls and rolls. No, you take the damage, it brings you to 0 hit points, and you have 1 hit point instead. There's nothing they can do about it. So this is a brilliant, brilliant way to really mess with an action economy. And it fits with the idea of, you know, they learn to prolong their life and stuff like this. You know, the idea of really getting in touch with death makes perfect sense. It is borderline broken. And when I say borderline, I mean in the same way that rogues are borderline broken with expertise. and sneak attack. They're not broken, but they're just that little bit off of it, where it sounds like it should be broken, but it's not. It works. It's not super overpowered, but it is something that's really, really effective, especially if you know how to use it the right way. There are certain situations where you want to drop to 0 hit points instead of burning a focus point to stay up. So knowing when to use it and when to not is a really useful thing. And it does mean a Nightsister or Nightbrother can be very, very aggressive. One of the problems I had when I first started playing my Shadow Monk, when he was only about level 6 or 7, is I would constantly like shadow step into fights, do my things, and I wouldn't be able to kill everything, and I would drop to 0 hit points all the time because I didn't understand how useful patient defense was. And so I was a little bit too aggressive. I didn't rely on the hypermobility. I didn't understand that I was supposed to be doing action economy controlling instead of just going in and just punching people to death. So something like Mastery of Death means you don't have to worry about that. You need to make sure you have focus points. But even without using focus abilities, the monk can do a lot of cool stuff without being completely tied down to I have to use focus abilities. So Mastery of Death is literally justifies the whole class. Now, this is where problems start coming into effect. Mastery of Death, in order to use it, people have to be hitting you. It actually incentivizes you to get as close to the enemies as possible. Ichor Lightning incentivizes staying back and giving you ranged attacks and things like that. So those two abilities don't work together. If you look at the Way of the Sun Soul, again, it's not a great subclass, but as it levels up, it gives you more and more things that allow you to stay at range. So it increases your ability to be a ranged monk. This one doesn't. It gives you a very useful ability, but never touches it again. It never gives you a way to weave it into the other abilities that you have. The next one we're going to talk about is completely impossible to use with both of them because one is ranged and one requires you to be in melee range. So that's the problem when you start taking pieces of different classes or different subclasses and just jamming them together. They don't work because subclass design in general should have a flow to it. As you get further into the subclass, it should reinforce itself on the playstyle it's designed to mimic. Way of Long Death starts off with the ability, when you reduce a creature within 5 feet of you to 0 hit points, you gain temporary hit points equal to your wisdom modifier plus your monk level. So the Way of Long Death monk actually incentivizes you to get close. So when Mastery of Death starts happening, if you Master of Death a couple of times and then one of the creatures you're able to take out, well, now you're no longer at 1 hit point. You've just gotten some temporary hit points, which might shield you from something else. And by 11th level, that is probably giving you, at 11th level, it should be giving you 16 temporary hit points, which is a decent chunk of temporary hit points. You should have a 20 wisdom by then, or at least an 18 wisdom. So anywhere between 15 to 16 hit points. That would be really, really useful with Mastery of Death. And it would work even better with this because Nightsister Order specifically talks about draining the life of their foes to prolong their own existence, but there's nothing in here that involves draining your enemies at all. That ability exists in the Way of Long Death monk, and it reinforces everything else you do. Like everything else in the Way of Long Death monk helps you use that touch of death and get more benefit out of that touch of death. Dark magic, Hour of Reaping, Way of Long Death makes you harder to hit and makes it so you can focus on just one enemy because the other ones can't get any closer to you. Mastery of Death did exactly what it is. So yeah, that's again, that's where this starts to fall on its faces. It took, if it had just recreated the Way of Long Death, this would probably be a more solid class. Calm down. That's my alarm. So, moving on. Finally, it's 17th level. You get Spirit Blade Assault. Again, this is copied word for word from Way of Long Death. It's called Touch of Long Death there. In this one, as an action, you conjure a blade of spirit energy and strike one creature within 5 feet of you with it, expending 1 to 10 focus points. Target must make a Constitution saving throw against your focus save DC. On a failed save, it takes 2d10 necrotic damage per focus point spent, or half as much on a successful one. So, first things first, this is a focus point burning ability. This, in all of Star Wars 5th Edition, I believe this is the most focus points you can spend in a single turn. And it translates directly to a lot of damage. 10d10 necrotic damage is a lot. But, as we talked about before, Ichor Lightning wants you to be a ranged monk. Spirit Blade requires you to get right next to the enemy. Dark Magic helps with Spirit Blade Assault because the Frightened condition condition would make it so that they any attack rolls they would make would be made at disadvantage. Now, the problem with Dark Magic is, again, it only lasts until the end of your next turn, so you'd use Dark Magic one turn, and then the next turn, if you use Spirit Blade Assault, you wouldn't be able to use Dark Magic, and the effects would end right after your Spirit Blade Assault. So, it's not great. Like I said, there are better ways to make Dark Magic work, but Mastery of Death fits perfectly. And it also means that when you're choosing how many focus points to use on Spirit Blade Assault, you also need to figure out, okay, how many hit points do I have? What's the likelihood that they're going to be able to hit me? Because it takes your action to do this, you might be doing Patient Defense as your bonus action. You might disengage and just run away. Like, there's a lot of different things that you can do with this, and understanding, okay, where is the best place I'm going to be able to use my focus points is what makes the monk in general so much fun to play. When you have a lot of different ways you can use your focus points, and none of them are the quote-unquote right choice. There are benefits and disadvantages to everything you do, and you get to make the decision of, okay, well, these are the benefits I want to use, and these are the disadvantages I'm willing to deal with. So in that aspect, again, Spirit Blade Assault is really interesting. If you combine that with the fact that you can make 5 attacks per turn, this starts getting a little less useful. So for 2 focus points for Spirit Blade Assault, you can do 4d10 necrotic damage if they fail their save. However, for 2 focus points using just Flurry of Blows, you can do 5d12 plus you'll probably have a 20 dex or whatever you're using by then. So 5d12 plus 25 damage for the same thing. So if you're talking about economy of what is going to get you the most bang for your focus points, in general, Flurry of Blows is going to be a better spent thing, depending on the armor class of the thing that you're fighting. If it's got a super high armor class, it may have a low Constitution score, and you can, you know, do it that way. Because this is a con save, stunning it is not going to affect whether or not it fails on it, so there's no way to make it auto fail, which kind of sucks. But other than like giants in D&D, there's not a ton of creatures that have massive Constitution saving throws. and you still do half damage on a save. So this Spirit Blade Assault is guaranteed damage. You theoretically can miss every single one of your attacks and do no damage. So again, neither one is the right answer. And there's also something to be said about doing a lot of damage in a single hit, specifically for things like concentration. Your DC for concentration is either 10 or half the damage you take. If you do 5 attacks, those are going to do 5 attacks where the DC is going to probably be 10, maybe 11. Actually, I don't think you can. Even max. Well, if you got a crit, you might be doing 11 or 12 for your DC. Whereas this, if you do 10d10, the average damage of 10d10 is, I think, 60? 6 times, yeah. The average damage is going to be 60 for that, which would have a DC of 30. If you use your 10 focus points. So if you have someone that's focusing on maybe a banish where they've banished half of your team, again, I don't know if that exists in this. I haven't looked through over all the force powers, but something really bad that they're concentrating on, it would be better for you to do one big attack than it would be to do 5 smaller attacks, because it's much more likely that you're going to be able to get a high enough DC that they simply just can't make their save. And whatever spell effect they're focusing on, or force effect they're focusing on, or maybe even tech effect, I don't know if... Again, I haven't looked at the spell casting system in this super well yet. It may be more beneficial than to do a single one. So, again, Spirit Blade Assault on its own, useful ability. It's not always the right ability. And that's what makes it a good ability. So, one more drink. So, final thoughts. Overall, the Nightsister Order, again, it's effectively the Way of Long Death without its 3rd level ability. And the Way of Long Death is an interesting monk. It's not a great monk. Both the Sun Soul and the Long Death monks are not great monks. With the Sun Soul being a little bit worse than the Way of Long Death. I rarely see either of them being played. They're 2 of the least popular monk subclasses. The only ones being probably less popular would be the Way of 4 Elements, because that one just doesn't work at all. This is copying something that kind of worked in D&D, which is fine, but it kind of misses the point. The Touch of Death aspect of the Way of Long Death was really a defining aspect of the class. And by replacing it with the Way of the Sun Soul and giving a better version of the Way of the Sun Soul, it kind of breaks this subclass to making your 3rd level ability, by the time you get to about 11th level, you're probably never using Ichor Lightning, because there's just better things that you can do close up than using your ranged attacks. You can't do Stunning Strike. You're wanting people to hit you, so you can use Mastery of Death so that their attacks are wasted. Things like that. It becomes, the 3rd level ability of a subclass should be kind of a defining aspect of the subclass. It should pave the way for how the subclass is going to play, and this one doesn't. The stuff that you get at 3rd level, you're going to throw out pretty quickly, because it just doesn't work. It doesn't get any better. You don't get any other ranged options in this, unlike the Way of the Sun Soul, where they give you more ranged options so that you can build a ranged monk. This is not a ranged monk. It is a monk that has a somewhat useful ranged attack that you probably won't use a ton. And that's the thing that I'm not particularly fond of. I'm also not fond of the fact that it's Ichor Lightning, but it's necrotic damage. Because, I mean, if you're going to make this effectively them using Force Lightning, make it lightning damage. Like, I don't see how that could be... Again, maybe because of droids and stuff like that, lightning damage is super overpowered or something in Star Wars 5e. Again, I haven't looked at everything in this yet. But it just seems kind of... Again, I get the idea. It's not actually Force Lightning. They're actually draining, and they wanted to get that idea of death and everything in there. But I don't know. Call it something else than Ichor Lightning. It doesn't feel like it should do necrotic damage. It feels like it should do lightning damage. And if you look at, again, lore-wise, the Nightsisters, they like using Force Lightning. They're big fans of it. They also, if I remember correctly, Nightsisters also like to use whips. Whips and things like Cat of Nine Tails, which are whips that have... Technically, a Cat of Nine Tails is not a whip in the strictest sense, in the idea that a whip is a device that's long and flexible, and it's designed... Its primary purpose is to create little sonic booms. Most of the time when people use whips, it's for the sound. Like a bullwhip, you don't actually ever hit a bull with a bullwhip. You use the sound to actually kind of direct. What a Cat of Nine Tails is technically a flagellant. It's a flexible device that's meant to strike and do a lot of superficial damage. The entire point of flagellating is to inflict pain without permanent damage. And whips can do that if you use them the correct way. Again, whips, that's how they were used in most issues of slavery. Like, whether it's Egyptian slavery or what happened over here, whips were something that were used as a punishment tool. But yeah, anyway, so overall, the Nightsister Order, I think it misses the mark. If it just was a recreation of the Way of the Long Death, maybe modifying dark magic a little bit so that it was more useful, this would be a really, really great subclass. The fact that they just steal the Sun Soul ability and make it better means that it fights against itself. I would much rather see them just take the entirety of the Way of the Sun Soul, except with Ichor Lightning. That would be a super fun class to play. This one, less so. Mastery of Death is still super cool. Spirit Blade Assault is still super cool. But you're going to basically feel like your third level ability is wasted. And you don't want that. You want to feel like every tool in your toolbox should be something that you use, and you're rarely going to use Ichor Lightning. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. Since we've covered all of them, what is your favorite of the monk subclasses in the Star Wars 5e Player's Handbook? Again, they're Crimson Order, Achani Order, Matukai Order, and Nightsister Order. Let me know in the comments down below. Again, my personal favorite, I think Matukai Order is, to be blunt, the only one that I think works the entire way. The rest of them, you obviously can play them, but I don't think they work very well. Whereas the Matukai Order, just everything about it is cool. It synergizes with itself, things like that. So anyway, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.